Namaskar. Wishing you all a very happy 2023. May this year be better than all other previous years. I am Ajay Prakash and welcome once again to What Does This Data Say? Last month, the winter session of the Lok Sabha was truncated without any notice. The reason given by the government was that there is a threat of the pandemic, the coronavirus spreading once again. And the very next day, all of our politicians from the BJP appeared in masks in the parliament. And thereafter, till today, I am yet to see any one of them wearing a mask in the public. On the other side, the view of the opposition was that the government is running away from a discussion on the China issue, the incursions in the Tawang area as well as in the Ladakh area. Now, whenever the China issue is being discussed, it really doesn't matter who is in the government and who is in the opposition. The list of accusations against the government remain the same. Just to remind you, here's a clip of Mr. Modi from 2013 and just see what he said to the then UPA government.
बड़ी बयानबाजी करके भारत के विदेश मंत्री चाइना गए और चाइना में जाकर के चाइना के साथ उनकी इन जो हरकतों के खिलाफ आवाज उठानी चाहिए थी, लाल आंख कर करके चाइना को समझाना चाहिए था। उसके बजाय हिंदुस्तान के विदेश मंत्री ने चाइना में जाके बयान दिया कि बीजिंग इतना बढ़िया शहर है, मुझे यहां रहने का मन कर जाता है।
The opposition parties are today giving it back to Mr. Modi, but probably in a much more decent parliamentarian manner. The Congress has raised 7 points on which they want the government to come out clean on the China issue. And one of the issues which the Congress keeps raising is that though our borders are abnormal, the trade with China remains normal and the trade deficit with China is ballooning. At one time when the BJP was in opposition, they had raised similar issues to the UPA. So in today's episode, I'm going to have a look at the Indo-China trade and I'll try to see whether India has an option or is in a position to cut down trade with China. For many of us Indians, when we think of trade with China, what comes to our mind in the first instance is the so-called China bazaars. These are the lowest quality and the cheapest goods which our traders import from China and then sell through such outlets. In fact, after the outrage with China, some of these shops have since then renamed themselves, but the goods sold in them are still imported from China. In practice, this is not what is China for India. These goods which you see here are not even a small fraction of our total imports from China. I'll first give you some generic data about the imports and exports of India so that you can well appreciate the impact of the Indo-China trade. This is the India balance of trade graph from 2001 to 2021. This is in reverse order. The values are in billions of US dollars. The yellow line here you see is the imports which India does, and the blue line is the exports. The red line is the trade deficit. You may well note that till 2005, we were a trade surplus country. Now, last year, 2021, we had imports almost worth $443 billion. The exports were $334 billion. So the total deficit was around $110 billion. The next graph which I'm going to show you is a very fundamental graph, and it shows the linkage between our GDP growth and our trade deficit. I want you to have a very careful look at this graph. This is the India GDP growth versus trade deficit graph. The yellow line here it shows the GDP growth, and you can read it from the right axis. The red line here shows the balance of trade, and you can read it off the left axis. This is in billions of dollars. On top, you will find that who was in power during these years. The data is from 2001 to 2021. So Atal Bihari Vajpayee till 2004, then Manmohan Singh 2014, and currently Narendra Modi. So you can correlate the performance against the person who was in power. The GDP story, I think all of you are very well aware. We reached around 7.9% growth in 2003, the India Shining campaign thereafter. Manmohan Singh delivered a consistent 8 plus percentage growth till 2007. 2008 was the global meltdown. We bounced back in 2010 to 8.2%. From 2011 onwards, it was a slow growth. We bounced back to around 8% once Mr. Modi took over. And then we reached a peak in 2016. Then came the unfortunate moves of the demonetization, after which consistently our growth has fallen. The corona just added to the dip. Another thing you might have noticed is that the trade deficit curve is following the GDP growth curve. That means whenever the growth goes down, our trade deficit is increasing, and whenever we do well, our trade deficit decreases. So here is the summary of the graph which I just showed you. The trade deficit, as it increases, the GDP growth slows down. In 2021, India's trade deficit was $109 billion. Next financial year, in 23, our GDP growth is slated to be around 5% as per the financial pundits. Now, this is going to put a pressure on our economy. Our growth will may further slow down, but our trade deficit will definitely increase. Now, how good is a 5% growth rate? Well, here is some history for you. The only time when India's growth fell below 5% was in 2002, when we had the Kargil War and the 9/11 in September 2001. 2008, when there was a global financial crisis, our growth rate came down to 3.1. In 2019, again, our growth was just 3.7%. What happened in that year? Probably it was a cumulative effect of the demonetization and the bad implementation of the GST program. Now I'll present to you the China import data and see if we can cut down on any of these imports. In this figure, I'm showing you the total India imports for the year 2020, which were $372 billion. 17.3% of that came from China. At second place was the United States at 7.17%, and third place was UAE around 6%. More than 55% of our imports come from these top 10 countries, totaling about $206 billion in the year 2020. If you note closely, from position 2, that's from US, down to position 5, Iraq, the products which we are importing are mostly crude petroleum, refined petroleum, petroleum gas, etc., to satisfy our energy needs. Most of our coal is imported from Australia. Now, what do we get from China? It's computers, telephones, broadcasting equipment, integrated circuits, semiconductor devices, heterocyclic compounds which goes in our medicines, and antibiotics. So these are the major items of import from China, which had total about $64.2 billion in 2020. If we look at our commodity wise imports in 2020, we find that our energy related imports, which consisted of crude petroleum, coal, petroleum gas, and refined petroleum, was around 27%. At the second place, after crude petroleum, comes surprisingly which is gold, and thereafter diamonds. Now, gold imports have their own story to tell, and someday I will do an episode that how the craze of gold of us Indians is really affecting our economy very, very adversely. So, this graph shows the top 20 commodities that we import. These total to about 50% of our imports and around $190 billion by value, as I said, in 2020. I have already talked about our energy imports and gold. We have diamonds. Diamonds are re exported, so it doesn't hurt us so much. And the others are ICs, which goes in our cars, telephones, all our smartphones, computers, broadcasting equipment, planes, helicopter and transport ships, palm oil, soya bean oil, office machine parts, and then we have commodities which go in our fertilizers and then into our medicines. Just remember, our energy imports constitutes 27.4%, and none of these come from China. The value was $102 billion. They come from Iraq, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Indonesia, Nigeria, US, etc. Probably this year, Russia will get added to this list. So, if you keep aside our energy imports, which don't come from China, out of the remaining imports, China's share is close to 24%. Almost one fourth of our imports are coming from that country. So, China remains extremely important for us. And none of these items are the ones which I had listed in the China bazaar. They really don't matter. In fact, even if you stop importing them, it won't hurt us at all. Now I'm going to look at this whole issue from the Chinese perspective. Do they find India a valuable trading partner? Let's have a look at some data. In the year 2020, China imported goods worth $1.55 trillion dollars and exported goods worth $2.65 trillion dollars. They had a healthy trade balance of over a trillion US dollars. The top 10 countries where China exports its goods are listed here. These constitute about 54% of their exports. The highest goes to US at 16.5%, followed by Hong Kong at around 9.9%, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Vietnam, United Kingdom, Netherlands, and then India figures at the ninth place where the exports are 2.43%, as I said, at $64.2 billion in 2020. So, if a country is your ninth largest trading partner as far as exports goes, then it should be of importance or some importance to China as well. And when it comes to imports by China, India doesn't really figure anywhere in the list. China imports a mere 1.2% from India, valued at $18.5 billion, and it has a huge trade surplus with India at $45.7 billion. Its largest importer is Japan, followed by South Korea, and at third place is the US. It has a massive trade surplus with the US at $316 billion. The only few countries where China has a negative trade balance is South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, and Brazil among the top 10 countries. And it's not only India. Many other countries today remain dependent on China, including the US and the Western countries. So I think the time has come when our politicians should dealing trade with the geopolitical or the military issues. Imports are essential for us as a country, for our survival and our growth. In fact, very specific to the China border issues, it is my feeling that neither our politicians nor our military has let us down. It's time that our bureaucrats, especially the diplomats in the foreign service, should sit down and think about this. So that's all in this episode. I'll see you again next week with some more data. Till then, goodbye and namaskar.